Welcome to No Scrub Scrub Club, NSSC. A little TLC inspired, a little medicine inspired, and a whole lot of inspiration from dope people doing dope things.
Thanks, everyone. Today we have a super exciting guest today. Just want to introduce you all to Dr. Kevin Graham. He hails from Georgetown, Guyana. He currently serves as the University Innovation Alliance Fellow for the University of California, Riverside. Dr. Graham has worked within the field of higher education for over a decade. He spent several years at the University of Rochester, serving as a lecturer and research assistant at the School of Education. He also worked as a human resource practitioner for underrepresented students at the university's medical center. Following his time at the University of Rochester, Dr. Graham assumed an assistant director position supporting undocumented students at Cornell University's Dean of Students Office. Kevin completed his Ph.D. in higher education at the University of Rochester. He has a passion for mentorship, diversity and inclusion, and working with students around notions of academic and personal success. And this is a huge interview that we're going to do today. I'm super excited. This is one of my best friends, and we always meeting up and having great conversations. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Dr. Graham.
Yeah. No, Kevin is fine. And Fred, that was an official CV. My goodness.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. I had to make sure I wasn't missing anything.
No, you did an excellent job with the intro. I might take that and just play that back anytime I need to give an intro. That was official. Thank you.
Yeah. So I kind of gave you an intro, but from your own words, can you tell us who you are?
That's a big question. I'm an immigrant. I'm a son. I'm a brother. I'm a researcher. I'm someone who fiercely advocates for others. I'm a lover of flavor and food, rhythm and music. I'm a symphony of humanity, put it that way. That's the only way I can give a quick summation of that.
Nice.
That's a good way of putting it. That's since we're kind of talking about who you are, it's always important to kind of figure out how you got to where you are, right? Because we want to know kind of your past and your history. Can you talk a little bit about where you grew up, how you grew up, and how kind of that has led to where you are today?
Okay, so I grew up in Guyana, Georgetown, Guyana specifically. It's the only English-speaking country in South America. And I lived in Guyana until the age, born in Guyana, of course, and lived in Guyana until the age of 12. Would not change anything about my childhood. Absolutely loved it. I think it's only when you come to the States that you realize how many things you had growing up, just upon reflection. Specifically thinking through things like sunshine and the places that you go on vacation. In very many ways, I left that place in 2001. That's when myself and my two sisters and my mother, we migrated to the United States, specifically to Brooklyn, New York. And then I went to high school in Brooklyn and transitioned to upstate New York for college. So between leaving Guyana and transitioning to Brooklyn, my goodness, the amount of lessons I learned. Those were foundational years in terms of, and if you are an immigrant or not, or somebody who's transitioned to another place, you learn so much when you travel. I think of travel as a palate cleanser. Anytime I become ungrateful about my circumstances, or just need a bit of inspiration, I travel, because you get to see the world and see life and how people live life from a different lens. So I love it personally. But those years at age 12, when you transition from Guyana to Brooklyn, I'm talking about proper Brooklyn. I didn't get Manhattan. I didn't get, I got Crown Heights, love Crown Heights. But so many lessons came with that. I learned a tremendous amount about myself in terms of adaptation, in terms of learning another culture, appreciating other cultures, and just resiliency. Because anyone who has spent time in Brooklyn will tell you that it takes a certain level of mental fortitude to successfully traverse the environment. It's not a bad thing. It's just riddled with lessons and opportunities for growth. And my goodness, I ended up taking it, not willingly, but taking advantage of every one of those opportunities for growth as I learned and adapted to my new environment. And I wouldn't change anything about that. So that's a little bit of flavoring about my background. And
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I actually wanted to ask a follow-up question, because
Please.
immigration is obviously, it's always a huge issue in America, and it's always going to be a huge issue as we speak about like the Ukraine, Russia conflict, and even like Black people in Europe,
Yes.
Caribbean immigration. So can you talk a little bit about what was the hardest part about moving from Guyana to the United States for you growing up in Brooklyn?
Okay. I'll do two things. So one, you mentioned immigration. I mean, love that topic for so many reasons. In short, I'll put it this way, and some people might give a pause, but truly think about it. America needs immigrants. I think immigrants are the best thing that has happened to the United States. And I'm not talking about because a lot of people make this argument about labor force, and they always operationalize immigration and explain immigration from the standpoint of economic growth and mobility. Those are solid points. I'll take another fruit. I'll take another perspective. Immigrants bring another way of life. They bring another way of viewing and doing things. And of course, amazing food. We can't say too much so without going down food and music. Even take Brooklyn, for example. Brooklyn's heartbeat and its rhythm is found in immigrants. You can literally, on a summer day, if you take time and you walk through Brooklyn on a summer day, you'll know exactly what neighborhood you're in based on the music, based on the vibe. And you'll know who inhabits that area and who does not inhabit that area. So there are innumerable reasons why immigration is a positive thing. I always say that America is the melting pot, caveat, that has not been stirred. And in some places, when that pot is stirred, you get a good flavor of, not even a good flavor, you get an appreciation for the value that immigrants add. Now, to the second question that you ask about sort of biggest lessons, or even sort of my perspective on transitioning from Guyana to the United States, for me, it was an inward journey. And it was an inward journey towards self. And what I mean by that is, when at age 12, which is a sort of a year and a time in your life of growth and learning, you're changing, your body's growing, your mind is growing as well. And when you come out of your context where I knew Guyana, but not all of Guyana. I knew Georgetown specifically, because that's where I grew up. And I had my ways and norms, and even a life path ahead of me. So I knew what I was going to do for school. I knew what that led to. I saw where family members had taken certain paths and where that had led. So I had examples around me. And now you come to the United States and you still have those examples, but the level of adjustment. So food, right? Good Lord, seasons. Seasons took me out. Seasons, because I call, and to this day I call anytime the weather gets cold, it's winter for me. Americans have this really developed way of appreciating autumn and fall. Stop the madness. It's winter. It's cold. Even the trees are stripping down and they're getting ready for battle. It's winter. So just transitioning and appreciating and getting to know the nuances, both macro nuances and micro nuances, and in terms of the differences between the countries was edifying for me. But the biggest thing that I walked away with was resilience. I learned that in my first winter. I learned that in the difference in our living accommodation between Guyana and moving in with my grandparents. We had a 1-bedroom, and it was 7 of us. So let me just make sure my math is right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, it was 7 of us.
Have to count everybody.
Yes, I'm a qualitative researcher, so I always fall back on that when I have moments with numbers. But that's where the resilience came from. When you transition to a country, you're adjusting, and it's 7 of you in a 1-bedroom apartment. You get to learn a lot about yourself. You get to learn a lot about family and the resilience that is family and the strength that is family. So those are some things that I walked away with easily in my first year. That wasn't lost on me. When I got here, I said, okay, Kevin, this is going to be an uphill climb, but you have support in family, you have support in community.
Yeah. One thing like we've definitely talked about a lot is, and like you brought it up a couple times, is family. And it's like you've said that your mother has been like an integral role in like shaping that the man that you are today. Like
Yes.
What values or characteristics like has she instilled in you, and how do you see that playing out?
For my mother, it was no excuses. My mother is the quintessential Caribbean mother. You learn organization, you learn timeliness, and you learn the value easily of not making an excuse. If it's not done, get it done. So watching my mother, because she had myself and my 2 sisters, and of course the backing of family, but watching her pull all of us into initially a studio, right? Because then you have an appreciation for that space. And then ultimately, the 4 of us, we had a 1-bedroom, and this is my mother providing. And the weight of the transition is not lost on me at that age, because I'm watching her do 12-hour shifts.
Yeah.
She doesn't make an excuse. She doesn't come home and say, because she has 3 of us, so she's not coming home and making any excuses. She's resting, she's getting ready for the next day. And there's that joke where your mother tells you to get the meat out the fridge, and you forget. That wasn't an option, because when she's done with that shift, the house had to be in order. It was like a well-oiled machine, because she kept going. So I learned that strength and that ability to carry weight with poise, because she never made any excuses. And I didn't just watch that in admiration and stood back. I watched that from a point of, okay, I need to get moving. So how can I help in any way, shape, or form ease that weight that my mother was carrying? Because what it was doing to her wasn't lost on me either. So those are some things that I learned from my mother. It'd be remiss for me to share love, because for her, I understood uniquely that it was a labor of love. And this was something, I'm huge fans of my grandparents as well. I'm very close to my grandparents. And everything I'm saying about my mother, I can easily say for my grandparents. But I see that as a connection. It's a shared narrative between the 2 of them. Well, and that was significantly motivational for me, because my job at the time was just to go to school and get good grades. So I couldn't make an excuse about that. When I see what my mother is doing, me hitting a keyboard, or putting my thoughts on paper, or figuring out an equation, or learning American history, light work in comparison to her getting up at 5 a.m. in the morning, having everyone was fed, everyone was dressed and ready for school, and then she would come back. So I learned that love, I learned that strength, And I learned about rising to the occasion because she definitely rose to the occasion time and time again.
That's beautiful. Wow. Seems like
Wow.
you had to meet amazing people around you, helping you grow.
Absolutely.
You know, and I appreciate what you said about learning how to pull your own weight at a young age. And I think that's it speaks to like the community aspect of you growing up. Like you weren't growing up in isolation or only worried about yourself. You were also worried about people. You were worried about how what you did and the decisions that you made impacted those you love. And I think that's so important in today's time where everyone is so independent and wants to kind of just do their own thing. So that was inspirational to hear. I wanted to ask you about kind of your career a little bit because Fred and I are very passionate about encouraging younger people, the next generation of particularly minority individuals, Black individuals, to work hard, to keep trying. Like I know, like the professional realm now is kind of like less, less viral than maybe being like a YouTube guru or being an
Right.
ID. So can you talk a little bit about your career? Like if someone, let's say, was in middle school or high school and was like, wow, Kevin looks very successful. How can I get where Kevin is going and what exactly does he do? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay. So my career has been, for me, I would summarize it as the old advice and adage of know thyself. And what I mean by know thyself is I've always had this disposition to, when people say, I love helping others, right? I've had that, but I always challenge myself to say, well, people need help doing a multiplicity of things. People need help with getting their garbage out. People need help with getting their food delivered. People need help with their health. From the most sort of minute but important thing to the biggest thing. And for me, the value of education and the transformative power of education is true to who I am and what I've learned. And I've gained a lot personally and professionally from appreciating and investing in education. So I would start there. The importance of education has been salient in my journey. And through each of my roles that I've had, whether it was working working at the medical center to design jobs for inner city teens. For me, one important aspect of that program was the graduation rate and the college enrollment rate. And again, this is not, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, man, this individual really appreciates education and it seems like education is the only, no, I fundamentally understand that college is not for everyone. And I'm speaking about education here in the structured form and the multiple ways in which you can invest in educating yourself. And I learned that from the teens that I worked with, because the graduation rate from high school was 100%, and the enrollment rate was 88% to post-secondary education. But what I learned and I saw from students was they had different passions, of course. And although some didn't enroll in college, some of the most successful students took other paths. The Navy, the Army, trade school, starting their own business, investing in singing. And those individuals have been met with tremendous success. So just knowing the value of investing in the learning process, that's been one thing that's been core to my career journey. Now, I would also advise knowing what you're good at doing. So what I was always good at doing was innovating in the space of formal education. So colleges and universities and K through 12 as well. And when I say innovating, meaning I have historically been good at, you have an issue around getting students access to a certain service. you have an issue where students are perhaps the educational system or institution isn't structured in a way that provides optimal access and optimal support for students to advance. And by advance, meaning towards graduation, credit accumulation, I see myself as sort of a higher ed engineer. So if there's an issue with an educational system, I have been, and I say this with great humility, I have been successful with looking at that system, taking research and best practices and saying, well, how can I take this research and this best practice to apply it to this situation? And oftentimes, how can I learn from the students and learn from the individuals who are in the system to create a best practice that works for them? So that's what I do for a living currently, and I enjoy it. And I enjoyed specifically working with students who are first gen, students who come from households with limited income, optimizing educational pathways that allow for those students to head towards their rendition of what success means for them, whether it be personal or professional. So that's a very roundabout and probably extensive way of sharing, what I do. But the advice that I would give to students is self-awareness. You have to know what gets you going. For the two of you, I'm pretty sure there was a moment where you fundamentally remembered and recognized medicine. And I enjoy this aspect of medicine. And similarly, education is an expansive field, but I enjoy this aspect of education, using research, working on students who, working on the system, not necessarily the students, working on the system that allows for greater access, that allows for greater support, that by extension positively impacts student outcomes.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting, because like the way I came about thinking about going through psychiatry, that kind of reminds me of this concept. It's a Japanese concept called Ikigai. And yeah, we definitely talked about that, but it was, what does the world need? What are you passionate about?
Right.
What can you get paid for? And what are you good at? And then all the summation was looking at like, oh, this is my reason for being. And I had to go through that thought process through clinical rotations, third year, to come to the point where it's like, okay, like psychiatry is my Ikigai. And
right. Yeah, we've definitely had that conversation about that concept. And without even mentioning it, I was sort of towing the line between explaining. So I think that's a very concise way. Thank you, Fred. That's a very concise way of explaining what I would impart to anyone that looks at what I'm doing and say, you know what, that has value. How did you do that?
Ikigai, I love that, Fred.
Yeah.
I need to look into that, because
there's
I'm not gonna lie, like sometimes being in medical school, just being in the system in general, you're just like, why am I doing this? Like, I don't have to be here. But I think if I look at that and like actually come to an understanding, it would help me. So yeah.
Oh yeah. And there's definitely been like tough points where it's like, I have to get through this exam. I have to like set up this appointment for these people. I had to see this many patients in a day. But then at the end of the day, you're just like, okay, what is my reason for doing this?
Right.
And the thing is, like, if you're able to kind of question that for yourself, that might help you kind of steer your direction into be like, oh, maybe this is not actually for me. Similar to it's like, okay, maybe college isn't for me, or maybe going to a trade isn't for me. And it's just helping you narrow down like your own life direction.
Right.
I guess kind of along the same lines, like going on a journey, I do kind of want to talk about your TED Talk that you had in Rochester. Yeah. There was a journey that you went through and helped you realize a lot of certain things. Would you be able to talk about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Can I just go back for 2 seconds? Because I think you just hit goal with the Ikigai concept in this conversation that's happening. Don't forget that question, because I want to come back to that.
All right.
I think there's something to unearth right there, because in even listening to the two of you sort of share how you came upon medicine, and this concept of Ikigai, I think it's a really healthy way to start the conversation around career, because especially when you are from a certain background, the narrative tends to be like hustle mode, like I have to make this money, you know, I have to do. And I think oftentimes there is a tremendous opportunity to forget about yourself and what will be your contribution to humanity, to the environment and the people and the community around you. I don't think that narrative is out there too strong for Black and brown people.
I agree. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think Black and brown people are encouraged to really work hard.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we forget, like, we are here to serve a purpose more than working hard and hustling, and that our purpose is not just to work and, you know, help our families, which it's unfortunate because we do live in a capitalistic society where money has to be made, bills have got to be paid.
Mm-hmm.
So, and a lot of us don't have generational wealth where we can just
Right.
chase our true purposes, our true passion. So we have to really like try to rebuild from like -10. Mm-hmm. And so I understand like why a lot of younger people feel that huge pressure to pick something or do something, because they just need to like get some grounding before really achieving their true purpose. And I never judge or advise someone to go after their dreams, or because you never know like what someone needs to get done first before they truly chase their purpose. So yeah.
And kind of like along those lines, it's just looking at it a certain way. Like essentially we have more bandwidth than various other people. So like going back to like the things your mom like was doing to help like provide for you guys and have like give you guys more opportunities. She may not have had the bandwidth to kind of search for her Ikigai and be like, okay, here's a reason for being, here's all this, but it's more so like, this is what needs to be done today. And like, hopefully I can give the bandwidth to my children or these people that are coming after me or my mentors or my mentees and so on and so forth. So,
and
yeah.
Right about that, because that was the greatest gift that was given to me. And I always think about what's going to be my return on investment for her. Like, how do I say thank you? I know I can never fully repay. So it's not even about repaying. It's about how do I say thank you in a way that is, replenishing. I was trying to search for the right word, because I know she depleted a lot of herself and my grandmother as well. So how do I say thank you in a way that replenishes what they have invested? And I purposely didn't say lost, but invested.
Yeah.
But I wanted to go back to what was said, and I brought us back here because I think when we talk about career, there's one word I think oftentimes that's missing, and it is sort of in the backdrop of Ikigai, and that is happiness. Happiness and self-fulfillment. And Ikigai gets at that.
Yeah.
But I think when we talk about career, we meaning Black people, a lot of times, and I'm very careful here not to generalize. If you're watching this, you're thinking, he's saying we, I'm not generalizing.
I'm not saying we, y'all. He's just saying some of us.
Some of us, exactly. That the notion and the value of happiness, I think, should be communicated more as we have these conversations, and self-fulfillment, which is, it can be a part of happiness and is for some people and most people. So I would just impart that concept of doing things that simultaneously make you happy along the way.
Yeah.
So, and I say that because I recently saw, I don't know how factual it is. So I'm very careful about putting information out that is not factual, but the suicide rate for Black men has been steadily on the rise. And I think this conversation is germane to Black men as well, because the pressure to live a certain lifestyle, provide in a certain way, have a certain level of masculinity, I think it's confounding, and leads to unbearable social pressures, because we as Black men, we don't have the conversation around happiness often or fulfillment often. But if I say to you, yo, we got to hustle, we got to grind, everybody understands that. We can get behind that at 1,000%, you know. But if I say to you, yo, Fred, we have to, like, if I have a room full of Black men and I say, yo, we have to be happy, right? There's going to be a pause. I know factually there's going to be a pause, right? We have to be fulfilled. There's going to be another pause, right? So some of the more, I'll call them gentle because I can't find a right word in this moment, but some of the more gentle things gives us pause. And I say us intentionally here because that includes myself. And learning to find happiness in the things that I'm doing, that's been a journey in itself. Even Fred, you and I talking about some of these concepts, that's been edifying for me too. But I think, and I've seen it and understood it and appreciated it as a more gentle conversation, you know? So how do we self-care as we go through, you, medicine, me, my PhD, how do we find fulfillment? And that's not forsaking everything that was mentioned. It's not an or, it's an and. And you could still grind. And so it's one is not, it's not one or the other, but how do you infuse it into your journey?
Yeah. But I love that for you guys. Honestly, I do. I've been learning so much with Fred about just like a lot. Fred has really taught me a lot about giving Black men the space that I feel like they're not given. And giving them a platform that they're not given, or you guys are not given. And so when I hear you talk about this, it's just like, it's heartwarming. So yeah,
I appreciate it. And it's kind of just one of those things where it's just like, yeah, there a lot of times, like when you see so many problems going on in the world, it's hard to kind of like focus on one or just be like, hey, this is kind of what needs to be triaged, or this what needs to be triaged. But I guess once again, going back to that Ikigai, like there's that component of just like, how best can I fulfill my role and what gifts can I bring to a certain component? It's not that I am avoiding another topic or avoiding like focusing on an issue, because these issues need to be addressed. However, where would I best fit myself, and how can I like add myself to the conversation for these other topics, but not be the like leading voice for that. So,
and Fred, to your point, speaking even of leading voice, right? We have a Black woman in this space. I think Black women.
Black? Oh no.
Oh man. But yes, where was I headed with this? Learning and leading voice. I think Black women have been doing exactly some of what we're talking about here in terms of self-care, and even like some of the conversations that I've mentioned about, you know, happiness, and I'll throw the word in there of love too. I think there's a tremendous opportunity to learn from Black women, because sometimes I listen to Black women talk to each other, right? And they'll have these robust conversations, you know, and it depends on how close they are. Like when women are close, Black women are close, there's a certain gentleness and love that mobilizes in the conversation, right? And how they check in on each other. I think we can learn a lot from that, you know. And there's a lot that's stated and unstated, and I've been very careful to listen. And I think it's fortunate to have Black women in your life with that loving friendship and relationship. And I think there is strength and resiliency that happens in those conversations, and love that happens in those conversations. So as we talk about this, I'm like, well, we've had an example all along, you know, and it hasn't been too far. It's been right there. But anyway, that could be a whole other conversation.
Oh yeah. And
don't get me down that path. That's a whole other conversation.
Once again, that goes into like taking in some humility and like being like, all right, I don't know everything. What what can I learn from you?
Right.
But like you said, that's
Yeah.
going to be part two.
Whole other as men who've been raised by Black women, I think, you know, that example has been there all along. But that's a whole other, we could deconstruct that in another conversation.
Yeah.
But Fred, get us back on track.
So
I derailed this.
No, so, but yeah, going back to like being up in Rochester, like this guy from the Caribbean, and you're in this frozen tundra, which has its perks sometimes, but
yes.
You talked about this during one of your TED talk. What was going on? Like, can you tell us the story about that?
Okay, so the story about my TED talk, I'll tie it to career. And it was an exercise I did at one point where I was trying to figure out what I'm good at doing. I asked some of the people who I'm very close to, you know, what do you think I'm good at doing? And I'm people I'm very close to. So some of the elders in my family, some of my friends that know me best, and siblings. I'm close to my sisters as well. And this harkens back to my TED talk, because when I was done, right, as soon as I got off the stage, I ran to my grandparents. Yeah. And I was talking to them, and I said, you know, what did you think? What did you think? Because I wanted to know. I had never spoken in public in front of my grandparents, so I was very interested in. I was more nervous because it was roughly around 250 to 300 people, right? It's an intimate audience. But I was more nervous to speak because my grandparents were there. If they were not there, easy. But it was their first time seeing me in this light. So I was nervous. So I ran to them afterwards, and you know, I acknowledged them at some point in my TED talk. I said, you know, my grandparents are there, and I ran to them, and I had to wait because everyone was interested in talking to them. So I waited, and I said, so no, what do you think? And my grandmother just shrugged her shoulder, and she said, "This has always been you." And that just struck me in that moment. Like, this has always been you. Like, you know, I call my grandmother my mom. I'm like, Mom, what do you mean by that? And she said, well, no, since you were small, you've always, you know, been the person to, you know, if somebody's being bullied or if something isn't right, you would always find a way to step up and say something. So here is how this is related uniquely to my TED Talk. I was given this opportunity by one of my mentors. He had suggested that, you know, I apply, and I had this platform, and I knew I wanted to talk about undocumented immigrants. Immigration is, of course, as an immigrant, I care about it, and it's unique to my family in terms of, not unique to my family. For me, the statuses, the different immigration statuses, it's like, okay, this makes sense. I should say something about this because undocumented students tend to be underserved across state and institutional contexts. So I wanted to bring awareness to it. And I didn't want to bring awareness to it just using numbers. I wanted to take the audience on a journey to say, listen, I made a mistake at one point in my life, and I crossed the border, and in crossing that border, I had people on this bus that knew me, right? So when I got stuck at the border, the people on the bus who knew me, they advocated, they waited, right? And I wanted to juxtapose that knowing, right, and advocacy and waiting and humanity to the fact that a lot of people who I saw who advocated for immigrants to be, you know, shipped home, or people who were chanting at different institutions, you know, build that wall around these students. Those people tend not to know those individuals. Now, I had made the observation too that the students who were advocating for people to, you know, stay, and they were out there at the rallies, and they were offering support. Those people knew undocumented students. They were friends, they were neighbors. They broke bread, they ate in the same dining hall. And the more I peeled that back, not just in the college context, um, when I first came to the States, I did a lot of construction work with my uncle. And in construction, you tend to find, it depends on where, again, you tend to find people who have mixed immigration status. And when you do work together, you build a bond. And I wanted to share in my talk that these people who were advocating and so adamantly saying that immigrants were doing harm and blaming immigrants for things that were more innate to America than being a fact of immigrants coming in, those people didn't know immigrants. They didn't work with immigrants. They didn't build friendship with people. Let's remove the title of even immigrants, with people, with these people specifically. So they didn't have a bond and a connection grounded in humanity, right? Because I think something happens when there's a sort of a human connection that happens when you're working with, when your neighbor is, right? It brings you into community with, and you appreciate these people, and you see these people more holistically. You see them beyond a status, an immigration status. You see the humanity in them. You see them as brothers, and you see them as fathers and uncles and cousins, and they're like me, right? And even looking at what's happening with the refugee situation now, and the differential treatment, right? We're seeing this now with Ukraine. People are able to identify with one more than the other. And in my TED talk, I wanted to convey that. And I wanted to convey that via the people on the bus. They knew me. To them, I was Kevin. I wasn't an immigrant. People on my floor, I was their RA, right? So people on my floor, they saw me as the leader. They saw me as the responsible one, right? As their residential assistant. If you're watching this, think back about your residential assistant. They're supposed to be some of the most responsible people on the campus, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully, fingers crossed.
Hopefully.
But that connection was there. I was a member of their community. No, we can't leave Kev. You know, he goes to Nazareth College. He lives down the hall from me. He lives across. So I wanted to convey that point.
Yeah.
Right. That it is not a matter of policy. We don't need to wait on policy. We only need to embrace our humanity, and we'll see that these are people, not necessarily a status, right? I think the statuses, undocumented, it creates dissonance. These are people with full-fledged lives in America. Yeah. These are people who are making, if you're in medicine, there are doctors that are undocumented, there are nurses that are undocumented, there's patient techs that are undocumented, the entire gamut. So these are people living lives similar to us. So I wanted to do that with that platform. I didn't want to make it about something, because the theme of the year was about space, right? And your talk has to fit into this theme. And the more sort of micro message was that there is enough space for everyone to be included. So I took a different definition and a different conceptualization of what space is, because I looked at what was happening and some of the arguments that were being made of it was about space. It was about economic space, right? It was about social space. And it was about creating space instead of connection. So I wanted to use this idea of the bridge, because what connects the US to Canada at the border was a bridge, right? And what happened was people waited, people embraced humanity. They didn't distance themselves from me because in that context and in that moment, I became an immigrant.
Yeah.
You know, they were like, oh my goodness, he's an immigrant, let's leave. So I wanted to use that opportunity and that platform to encourage and urge individuals to not necessarily focus on the story and woe is me. It wasn't a woe is me. I came back to the States. I was perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But reflect on yourself and your own views and perspectives as it relates to immigrants and this topic of immigration, because it was a hot topic and still is. and people had these very polarizing views that I thought and still do think was grounded in the fact that they're not connected to an immigrant.
That's so beautiful that you said that. Like, I think a lot of people kind of detach themselves from immigrants or refugees because they look
Right.
at refugees as other, or they look at refugees and put them in a certain category. But I was listening to Trevor Noah recently, and he said anyone can become a refugee at any point in their life.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like kind of having that understanding that your home can be taken from you at any moment in life. It doesn't matter if you live in Ukraine or anywhere in Europe or the United States of America, you can become a refugee. And so having that understanding and kind of, I feel like you were kind of ahead of the game in that sense, because just aligning people who are kind of like safe and already kind of privileged to immigrants is so important to make sure that humanity is maintained essentially. So yeah, I'm impressed that you did that. That's very impressive. And thank you for taking that initiative, because I'm a refugee myself and it's definitely a very passionate topic of mine. And yeah, so.
And if anyone hasn't seen his TED Talk, we're gonna put in the link below, but it was powerful. And I don't know, it's actually kind of looking at it now, like we're actually all like either immigrants or like children of immigrants, and like it's the othering aspect is difficult when either you feel like you are part of this or you are making strides and you're just like, okay, like things should be okay, but then something randomly happens and then you're just like, oh, that's a reminder of like where society may or may not see me currently. So these are kind of things that we want to have like conversations about and continue to bring up to realize like, okay, my perspective may not be the same as someone else's, and we need to kind of like reach out and listen about that.
Yeah. So I kind of wanted to switch to a lighter note, if that's okay with everyone. I wanted to know, who can you name, maybe give us like 3 of your most inspirational people in the world and tell us why they're inspiring to you.
Ooh, all right. I tend to know the inspiring people. So my grandmother is one of them. So 2 spots are automatically taken, right? No, let me combine my grandparents, right? Because my grandmother, my grandfather combined, they're a dynamic duo, they're a unit. They're responsible for bringing myself, my mother, my sisters to the States. And so many things that we need a whole nother podcast to really list out all the things. Of course, my mother is inspiring for me, and my grandparents really quickly, because I want to quickly highlight my grandfather, because he was in Guyana, and he was a mechanic that fixed airplane engines and boat engines, and when he came to the States he had to start over again, do Ph.D. And to me, I was doing math and 8th grade math at the time, because that's when was my first year in the States, was 8th grade, and I watched him learn what was it? Whatever math it was, he was learning it at the same time that I was, and he was explaining the concepts to me. And he never quit on anything he started, and I felt that was tremendously inspiring. And he was patiently impatient, as I described it. So I have 1 spot left. So my mother, spoke a lot about my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, and then it has to be my uncle. So and there are people, don't get me wrong, there are books that I read, but I find a tremendous amount of inspiration from the people in my family, because I break bread with them, and I understand, and I understand their personal assets as well as their personal flaws. And I think it's in appreciating those 2 things that makes them inspiring to me. My uncle was the first person to give me a job when I came to the States, and he did garbage removal and construction. And whenever people see me sometimes, they're like, Kev, did you run track? Did you play any sports? No, I didn't play any sports. From the time I got here until probably senior year of college, first year of grad school, I worked for my uncle's construction company. And I had other jobs, I had other internships, but I always worked for my uncle's construction company. So I'd have on the mask and the dirty shirt and the pants. And so for me, that gave me to this, like I have calluses, and those are not from pull-up bars or weights. That's from, it started from breaking down walls and moving garbage. And I find my uncle to be inspiring because despite him not being formally educated, the man is a genius at running his moving company, because he had his segment of business, his sectors of business, and he explained it to me, and he was the first person to give me responsibility at a high level, in terms of managing different aspects of his business. And for me, that was trust. And I found his way of mobilizing in the world as an immigrant man who was teaching himself business and teaching himself how to read different business statements and how to position his mind-blowing. And I had the good fortune of working beside him for years. And that work took us to almost every nook in Brooklyn, like working in the projects, working in some of the residential communities. And at every point when I'd be exhausted, right, he would say to me, you know what, Kevin, schoolwork's a lot easier than this. Like if you don't want to do this, excel in that direction. So I find those individuals, those are my inspiration.
Schoolwork is a lot easier than that, I would say. But I don't know if med school or PhD. I don't know. Maybe it's a tie.
Put it this way, by age 14, I had seen there's a whole industry that happens in New York City before people wake up. I had seen almost every garbage disposal dump yard in the 5 boroughs by age 14. And sometimes 4 a.m. I'm there and we're emptying the truck, because think about gutting a building. You have to break down the walls, you bag it up, you throw it in the truck, you go to the garbage station, you weigh the truck, and then you unload. And he didn't have one of those ones that would go back. You'd have to manually unload it.
Yeah.
So at age 13 and 14, you're up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and those are my summers. And he would look at me and he would say, schoolwork's a lot easier than this. So when the semester would start back, it was light work for me. It was reprieve, because I was laboring all summer. So I'm grateful for having that experience. I think I'm grounded because of that experience, because when you're dressed in a certain way and you have dust all over you, you're invisible essentially. You can literally walk and no one will notice you. So that has allowed me to see and notice some of the unnoticeable people, and unnoticeable in terms of, like, we won't, as a society, and I'm in LA, there's a lot of homeless people. And, I always take care to notice and recognize that they're living lives as well.
Nice. Yeah. And so many lessons, and there's probably so many other lessons that you could still learn from these people. But
I'm still learning from them.
And still learning, yeah. And I guess, like, we're kind of getting closer to time, but along those same lines, but more kind of like personal side.
Mm-hmm.
I know going through like schooling and PhD and trying to live your life, there's also another component that comes in. That's with your love life and bringing someone in. What are some like qualities that you look for, or values that you look for in like a long-term partner?
Good question. In this moment, because I'm still learning about relationships. I think it's an ongoing thing. I don't think one ever arrives at the point where they know all. So at this point in my life, here is what I have a tremendous value for: reciprocity. I think reciprocity is so attractive. I think it's so attractive. I think someone who sees love as a verb, not a noun. And what I mean by that is, I would say love requires action. It's not something that's sedentary. It isn't. I think it grows. I think it's a choice. You have to make the choice to love over and over again. So it's not a place that you arrive at. Oh, I'm in love. You know, and I think it's a very sort of Western way of expressing those sentiments. You know, I'm in love. You know, I've arrived at that place. But even if you've arrived at that place, I think it requires action. You know, it requires action to keep it alive and to keep it growing. So someone who sees and appreciates that love is a verb. I have a deep appreciation for communication. I think, and I welcome all communication. So not just affirming communication, just letting your partner know. And I'll round it out with this: the ability to continually meet at a place. You know, they say you should meet someone where they're at. I think we're complex beings. We're always growing, we're always changing. I think the ability, and I think communication helps with this, right? Because it's me saying, yo, I'm going over there, right? And your partner is saying, you know, will you come with me? You know, do you have the capacity to come with me? Are you interested in coming with me? Is this path growth inducing for you? Is it kind? Is it caring for you? So I think if you're able to communicate and continually meet and take a journey together, I've learned and experienced that those concepts and practices have a tremendous value.
Yeah.
And I think it keeps relationships alive. Yeah.
Wow. Wise words from the doctor himself. You should be a therapist, man. Like seriously, that was some knowledge. I wanted to ask you about, so one thing about Kevin is he likes to travel. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows he's been to a lot of different countries. If Instagram, you'll know that.
Yep.
And particularly he likes to travel to Black or Caribbean countries, which I stand for, because I do think you can't know yourself if you don't travel to where you're from, essentially. So I want to know, and I'm sure people want to know as well. And we saw you going to all these countries when you were getting your PhD. How do you manage to travel when you're busy? How do you plan to travel? And how do you kind of monetarily plan around it, as well as time-wise? But also, what has traveling taught you? Just one big lesson that traveling has taught you about yourself.
The value of enough. Well, I'll combine it with two things. So it's the value of enough, and it takes very little to be happy. Very, very little to be happy. And I'll be brief here in the interest of time. So one thing that I saw that, take for example, in Sweden, when I was in Rochester, I hated the cold. When I say I hated the cold, still do. When I went to Sweden, I saw these people riding to work. The weather is slapping. The sun sets at 2:00, right? I don't know what I was doing in Sweden, but the ticket was $130 at the time. So that's why I went. And it was a group trip with friends. But when I saw people being happy in wintertime, I said, oh my goodness, I've been doing this wrong. The kids come out and they play in the snow. They have recess. So one day I was doing something in a park, walking in a park to go buy a muffin. And I saw these kids coming out and they were having their recess. And I asked, what's happening? Is this special? And no, we do this every day. And I saw, them playing in the snow. And then as I was driving huddled in Stockholm, I saw this man jollily riding to work, right? And I'm like, people look very happy, you know, and the weather isn't bothering them. And I'm like, you know what, Kevin, it takes very little to be happy. And in my travels, primarily because I don't make a habit of traveling to cold places, but primarily in Caribbean countries, I really want to make it to one of Africa's 54 countries. But I recognize that some of the people who, even in my family, when I go back home, and one salient theme that I saw in places like Jamaica, Belize, Colombia, people had this knowledge of enough. Like they built their homes, they're making their contribution in whatever work they're doing, they're known in their community, and that was enough for them. They were fulfilled. You could tell that these people weren't settling. They were like gurus in a way, without even knowing it, in terms of how they were living. Like, these people know what enough is. They didn't care about the next car or the next thing or the next or the next or the next. They were not vested in the stock market. They were not paying it, but they knew it was a way of life. They knew enough. Wow. There's a second part to that question that you asked me, if you could repeat it, that I want to talk quickly.
It was just about how you managed to kind of plan for it and plan for traveling.
For me, it was a priority. I knew factually for that from the time I became a citizen in 2012. And when I got my passport, I got freedom. I said, oh, they don't know what they just did. And for me, I knew any money that I made, any surplus that I made went to traveling. And even if I couldn't travel far, I would go across the border and go to Toronto and experience, because some of my best writing when I was doing my dissertation, some of my best writing happened when I was away from the campus, when I wasn't wrapped up in the academic environment. And I have a tremendous value for always, it just resets me, or it gives me a new idea, or I see something, you know, I see a person carrying a big bundle on their head while I'm on a bus somewhere. And for me, I find inspiration in that, or I get grounded, in that, or it's something I notice. And also it made the journey, the PhD journey, more enjoyable. And anyone who's thinking of this, I would always say, pick a location that you're happy with. Rochester didn't do it for me in terms of the weather. So I always made sure to get out, because you're adulting when you're getting, if you're a traditional PhD student. Some people get PhDs at 16, 17, 18. But if you're traditional, like most of us on the call here, and you're at that age, you're adulting, you know, your friends are getting married, people are buying homes, and in very many ways, it's a grounding journey. So you now get the opportunity to say, you know, what's important to me? What's the one thing? And for me, I quickly realized that thing was traveling. I love a sunset. I love a sunrise, because rarely do we get to see the day start or it ends. Traveling afforded me that when Rochester was dark and gloomy. I planned around it. Any money that I got went to my travel fund. And I would pick out, meticulously sit and pick out, okay, tickets are cheap this time of the year. I want to be there for Carnival. I want to be there for this, or I want to be there for that festival. And it wasn't these big expensive things. I'll end here. If I had a friend or a family member in the country, I would call and coordinate. Hey, I have $250, right? That's my discretionary budget. I can afford the plane ticket. Could I stay with you? And I'll make sure that you and I eat well. So it for me, it was just hacking along the way, and knowledge of self, and knowing what self. For me, travel was it is still part of self-care, and it was very much so part of self-care. Traveling and making sure I see, you know, my therapist was part of self-care, and still is. So that's how I managed to do it. I made it a priority.
Awesome.
People, and my mother would always say, people make time for things they want to do.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
That's true.
Thank you.
Yeah. And once again, you're more than welcome to stay with me wherever I end up, and wherever I end up in the future. So
yes, come stay with me too. Honestly, next time I come to California, I'm definitely
Mhm.
And I hit up Kevin.
Please, 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 please come and let me know.
So, appreciate it again. Kind of wanted to like round it out with a few like rapid fire questions and then like send you on your way. But I guess one of the first question is, what is one of your favorite songs of all time?
Jesus, Fred. Rapid question number 2. I'm thinking. I'm
Okay.
thinking on that one. So go
Number
to
2. What are you currently reading right now?
The Biggest Bluff. It's a book about poker. It's a woman who plays poker. Anna something. She has a very European last name, but it's called The Biggest Bluff, and it's edifying. My next read is going to be The Alchemist. It's a reread.
What are some of the top 2 places that you've been?
Top 2. One is home, because home is home.
Yeah.
I have a very, very soft spot for Belize. I love Belize. Yes. So home and Belize.
Okay. And this is also going to be another thinking question, but if you could change one thing or leave the world with one thing, what would it be?
The value of knowing enough. I think we do less damage if we knew what enough is. I think a lot more people would be happy if they knew what their enough or the concept of enough was. I think it would work environmentally. I think it would work relationally. I think it would work socially. I think it would work economically. I think what we have right now is a system that we consume into perpetuity.
And you have one for the first one?
Favorite song. I'll give you a favorite genre.
Okay.
I combine it. I have to combine it. Right now I'm struggling between soca, right? Because I grew up on calypso, and so soca, right? And Afrobeats.
All right. I know he's gonna say Afrobeat. I was like, if you don't put Afrobeats in there.
Right, because you listen, I don't care what anyone says. You combine those 2 genres, you're gonna have a good time. And I have a soft spot for dancehall and reggae. You know, I have to. Fred is Jamaican. But yes, no, this has been fun. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the thoughtful questions. And thank you for sharing some of your knowledge and insights as well. This is time well spent for me. So thank you.
Sure. And is there somewhere where people can reach you or like reach out to you, either social media or
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn? All right. LinkedIn.
Professional man. LinkedIn. You can be found on LinkedIn at Kevin Graham.
Yeah, we don't want to see the Instagram. We'll keep it on LinkedIn.
Instagram has a lot of sunsets. I'm a sucker for sunsets. I always post a sunset or a sun, you know, or if there's when the world opens back up, soca, Afrobeats, good food.
Good food.
Yes.
Well, once again, really appreciate this. This was a super awesome conversation, and I wish like actually we didn't have to stop, but this was amazing. And welcome to the club. Welcome to the club.
Thank you for having me as part of the club. And listen, continue to do the impressive work that both of you are doing. I think this is a much needed platform. I think there are people who've been on here and who will be on here that will share their knowledge and their wisdom, and it's going to be edifying and inspirational for folks as well. So thank you for spotlighting stories that oftentimes are not covered. And thank you for being those stories yourselves.
Oh yeah, of course. Dr. Kevin Graham.
Yes.
All right. Have a good one.
All right.